Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. This video is all about the Tatars. There's a general perception that Tatars are the weakest of the new Definitive Edition civilizations, and at this point the online win stats agree they're not a great 1 vs 1 civ, especially in the mid-game, but they're actually pretty solid in team games. They're classified as a cavalry archer civilization, and as we'll see, they really do have a lot of bonuses focused on that unit. At the same time, I don't think they always have to be played that way, and both foot archers and cavalry can be good choices at various points as well. They're really a cavalry archer and cavalry archer civilization all in one. Let's check them out. To start with their team bonus, Tatars increase the line of sight of their team's cavalry archers from 5 to 7, which is then increased by 1 for every additional range upgrade. In general, I find the line of sight team bonuses a bit underwhelming for the most part, aside from the Mongols to the scout cavalry line because it helps find resources early on. Arguably, the extra 2 line of sight is useful for cavalry archers because it gives you more map awareness, keeping tabs on enemy units and mangonels, as well as spotting villagers to snipe. It's hard to say though how much the team is going to benefit per se, since cavalry archers are only commonly seen from maybe 5 civilizations on top of a handful of unique units, so in practice I think this often just functions as a small civ bonus for Tatars themselves. Moving on to their proper civ bonuses, the first is their eco bonus, which is that villagers gather 50% more food from herdables. Herdables of course refers to cows, sheep, pigs, etc. After factoring in decay, I found that equates to around 130 food per sheep, instead of the usual 89 when using 6 villagers to collect. That's an extra 41 food per sheep, and considering standard maps give you 8 sheep, you're getting something like 328 extra food. If you have 8 cows instead of sheep, like on Lombardia for example, that's around 500 extra food the map is giving you. It's also particularly useful on Nomad or Mountain Pass, where some lucky scouting can give you more than the standard number. Now, while it might superficially seem comparable to the Britain's faster collection, their effects on your economy are quite different. The major implication for Tatars is they don't need to start farming as early, since your sheep typically last into the feudal age. That's useful for almost any type of early rushing, because it means you can focus on getting military buildings down as soon as you advance, and can then worry about farms afterward. A nice side effect of that is it's also much easier to pick up horse collar before laying down any farms, which will then delay the wood to reseed them until even further into the game. Contrast that with Britons, who go through their sheep faster and become actually more dependent on other food sources in early feudal as a result. I'd say Tatars have the trickier eco bonus though, because unlike many civilizations that improve your economy passively, think Japanese cheaper camps or Frank faster berry collection, you actually need to consciously change your build as Tatars in order to maximize the benefit. The most interesting strategy I've seen that makes use of the bonus is a fast feudal into an instant 3 stables with scouts in order to overwhelm the opponent. I'm not necessarily advocating everyone should use that particular strategy, but it gives an example of a creative way to use the bonus to full effect. Their next bonus is that their units deal 25% more damage on higher elevation, also known as the Kenobi bonus. It sounds pretty crazy at first, but as I found, it doesn't double the normal advantage of being uphill, since only half of the hill bonus is from that extra damage. The other half is the reduced damage that downhill units do, which for Tatars is unaffected. To give a simple example, with identical units, the one uphill should end with 40% of its HP left. For Tatars, it's more like 55%. Definitely better, but as you can see, it's not that much better. In a recent video about attacking uphill, I found you need about a third more units than the opponent to have a decent trade from downhill, whereas against Tatars, you need 50% more to take a fair fight. I see this mostly as an archer and cavalry archer bonus, since melee units tend to get mixed together on hills, giving up at least part of their advantage. At the least, it certainly pays for Tatars to be extra conscious about any hills they can make use of. I also like the bonus quite a bit when it comes to trebuchets, where 50% more damage can mean the difference between winning a treb war or destroying a castle versus letting it stand. Their last civ bonus though is where they really start to feel like a cavalry archer civilization by getting thumb ring and Parthian tactics for free. That's significant both for the saved resources as well as the research time. Unlike getting a university tech for free, these are archery range technologies, so they directly compete with unit production. In preparation for this overview, 4 years ago I found that Thumb Ring not only gives your archers and cavalry archers 100% accuracy against non-moving targets, but it also increases crossbowmen and cavalry archer firing rate by about 16% and 10% respectively. For cavalry archers who have around 70% accuracy from 6 tiles away, that's a big difference. On paper, that's something like a 57% damage increase to cavalry archers that are 6 tiles away from their target, though in practice where you can micro to get closer, it's probably not quite that much of an increase. Still, it's a critical tech for cavalry archers to greatly increase their effectiveness, while it also happens to be useful for any crossbows you have as well. It's not a perfect comparison, but it's on the effect size of the Ethiopian faster attacking bonus for free when you hit Castle Age. But wait, that's not all. You also get Parthian tactics for free, which again has a positive effect on cavalry archers, increasing their armor and giving them 4 extra bonus damage against spear units. I consider this the less important upgrade of the two, since it's pretty cheap and relatively easy to get in Imperial Age, but again, you're getting it instantly, which is an immediate power spike for your cavalry archers as soon as you hit Imperial. Even if you aren't up against spear units, you're still getting that extra armor. So those are the Tatar bonuses. Between cavalry archers with +2 line of sight, doing more damage from uphill, and getting 2 techs for free, it's really clear why they're a cavalry archer civilization. You might then expect them to have a cavalry archer unique unit similar to the Mongols, but at the same time they already have the cavalry archer thing covered at the archery range. Instead, in a move that I think gives the Tatars a more interesting identity, their unique unit is in fact a cavalry unit called the Keshik. I've done a more thorough analysis elsewhere, but to summarize the main takeaways, they're quite comparable to the Knight line statistically, with a bit less emphasis on attack and more on HP. Paladins are significantly stronger than the elite version, though the Keshik's cost is dramatically less. In fact, they cost around half the gold, on top of having the unique special ability to generate a slow trickle of gold as they fight. The longer and more drawn out the fight, the better, but it would be incorrect to see them as a source of infinite gold generation. Well, in a reasonable game anyway. It's not a lot of gold, certainly never enough to pay for themselves, and the easiest rule of thumb is they refund up to a quarter of their cost in a balanced fight. The gold generation isn't enough to sustain them in a 1 vs 1 late game, and instead I think they're best thought of as a more cost-efficient but less population-efficient version of the Knight line. The creation time also compares favorably to Knights, which makes their castle requirement less of a hindrance, and considering most of the time you end up with a castle for other reasons anyway, they're a good unit to mix into your army. Despite their heavily armored appearance, they're actually slightly faster than Knights and the same speed as cavalry archers, so mixing in a few also doesn't sacrifice any of your army's mobility. That said, I prefer them most as a nice weapon in team games. The fact they put so much less pressure on your gold than paladins more than makes up for their weaker stats in my opinion, not that Tatars have access to the paladin anyway. They also pair nicely with cavalry archers for a lot of mobility, while leaving your stables free to produce other complementary units, like camels, steppe lancers, or hussars. As you can probably tell, I think it's a good unit, and a nice option for the Tatars' mid to late game army. But wait, yet again, there's more. Tatars have a second unique unit that's unlocked by their Imperial Age unique tech, and that's the Flaming Camel. At first glance, it has some obvious similarities with the Petard, with comparable stats and a similar one-time use. In reality, it's quite different though, in that it deals very little bonus damage against buildings, and also doesn't have the Petard's bonus against siege. In fact, either of those cases would be a terrible way to use them long term. Instead, their major bonus damage is against all sorts of cavalry, with an especially large bonus against elephants. Even with all that bonus damage though, you still need to average hitting 3 or 4 units with every detonation in order to justify their cost, which isn't always easy to do. Overall, I see them as being a meme unit or a way to dunk on another player if they're making a lot of elephants and you have resources to burn, or explode. So those are their unique units, one useful, one situational at best. Let's move on now and take a look at the unique techs. The first is Silk Armor, which gives light cavalry, steppe lancers, and cavalry archers +1 pierce armor. At 400 wood and 300 gold, it's similarly priced to the armor upgrades for cavalry and archers at the blacksmith, but with food switched to wood. The effect applies to a more limited pool of units, but I consider it an essential upgrade for cavalry archers, as it gives them a permanent long-term advantage over other civilizations with full upgrades. Contrast that usefulness with their Imperial Age unique tech, which gives their trebuchets +2 range and of course unlocks the Flaming Camel. To credit the tech, it does give Tatars the farthest firing unit of any civilization. It's not the greatest unique tech of all time, but like I said earlier, it pairs well with their extra hill bonus, and gives them a nice way to snipe either onagers or bombard cannons from safety. It's relatively cheap as well, but I still wouldn't consider it an essential one you need to rush to pick up. So those are the unique units and techs for the Tatars. Again, we see some help for the Cavalry Archer, this time for a lasting advantage in addition to their free techs. The Keshik is also a nice additional option on top of what's already a good variety of cavalry at the stable. But speaking of that variety, let's focus in on their tech tree, starting with the archers. The one thing they're missing is arbalest, but I wouldn't let that stop you from considering archers or crossbowmen early on. As I said earlier, I think the herdables bonus can be used to keep you off farms a bit longer than usual, and you have all the archer upgrades until Imperial Age. In fact, I found that archers are a nice way to open and start you down the road of upgrading ranged units to set up a transition to cavalry archers later. Of course, cavalry archers are their signature unit in the mid to late game, with more pierce armor and free techs in both castle and imperial to keep you ahead of the tech curve. In my opinion, it's quite a strong archery range, and I give it an A-. The only thing I see holding it back is simply how much competition there is among archer civilizations, and that their mid-game economy can sometimes be an issue. Next up, let's take a look at the infantry. This one's not so pretty, missing 2 blacksmith upgrades as well as the champion and supplies. Really, it's tough to find anything good to say about it. You do have the halberdier, and I suppose if you normally forget infantry armor anyway, then they'll be average for you. Like I said, I'm struggling to find positives here. I'm gonna give it the rare F grade, and as Tatars, I try to avoid using barracks units whenever possible. Unfortunately, it gives them a notable weakness to enemy eagle warriors, and the American civilizations are some of their toughest matchups. Moving on, let's take a look at their cavalry. Similar to the arbalest at the archery range, the paladin is the only thing they're really missing. And remember, their hussar and steppe lancer have 1 more pierce armor than usual. When appropriate, I really like opening with scouts as Tatars, given the longer lasting herdables securing your early food income, and I think the hill bonus can be situationally helpful in early scout fights. You also have to remember the Keshik's long-term value, especially in terms of gold, and the camel can at least partially address the weakness of their spear line. I wouldn't argue they're a top 5 cavalry civilization, but I'd give them a B+, and it's a great complement to their archery range units. Next up, let's take a look at their siege. As you can see, they're only missing the siege onager and bombard cannon, which still leaves them with a lot of variety. The siege ram is a nice option to offset not having infantry for their anti-building damage, and of course you have +2 range on your trebuchets. It might seem generous, but I'm gonna give them a B+. There's really no direct bonus for the siege workshop, but it's still average or slightly above. Moving on now to the navy, their early herdable bonus can be helpful here, since farms are not something you want to invest a lot into when you're trying to make ships. At the same time, your fishing economy already supplies a lot of extra food, so it's questionably helpful. I give them a little bit of credit for it, but it's a C+ in the early game to me because it's pretty indirect. Switching focus, in the late game, they're missing the heavy demo ship, and more important in super long games is you're missing shipwright. The lack of 2-man saw theoretically makes it harder to sustain ships later on as well. Overall, it can do the job, but will really struggle against good belly button civs. I'd give their navy a B for the late game for an overall B-. Taking a quick look now at the monks, any small children in the room should probably leave at this point, because this is some disturbing imagery. In Castle Age, redemption is missing, so no converting buildings or siege, and they're missing sanctity, so your monks have permanently lower HP. Then in Imperial Age, you're missing theocracy, which means group conversions take faith from every monk involved. It's pretty rough, and maybe I'm being a little overdramatic, but it's a C at best. Moving on now to defenses, 25% extra attack from uphill is actually pretty solid, since castles are often placed uphill when possible. The university is also fairly open, just missing architecture and the Imperial Age upgrades to guard towers. The bombard tower is an interesting option, though I tend to associate it more with slow grinding pushes, whereas Tatar strike me as a civilization that rely on mobility and surprise raids. There are also no bonuses that jump out as helping a defensive playstyle, so overall I'd say it's a pretty average B. Wrapping things up with the economy, it's pretty good in early feudal, but then stagnates throughout the mid-game. I like having guilds for a better market in Imperial Age, and they have lots of units that give good value, like the Keshik or the Cavalry Archer if you can keep them safe, as well as having some extra pierce armor on their hussars. I think they have a middling B range economy, but if you're savvy, you can find ways to keep up with civilizations that should theoretically be stronger in that regard. And overall, I think that describes how I feel about Tatars in general. They don't beat you with an overwhelming economy, but they have nice power spikes into value-friendly units at the start of each age. Combining units from the archery range and stable as you would with Huns or Mongols is going to be the main path to success. In terms of coming up with a strategy, I like to start from a place of knowing I'm aiming for cavalry archers in mid-Castle Age, and think about the transitions needed to get there. Luckily, since cavalry archers need upgrades for both cavalry and archers, you can really justify going for either of those routes, and it works well to go for units at either the archery range or stable. Flipping between the two also feels natural as well, since they tend to cover each other's counters. Personally, I think it makes a little more sense to get there through archers into crossbows, since that way you're picking up archer blacksmith techs along the way and benefiting from free thumb ring. But Tatars are also fully capable of going scouts into either knights or steppe lancers. Unfortunately, their lack of strong infantry gives them a notable weakness against eagles, and strong camel civilizations can also be difficult to handle. As always, being able to adapt and raid civilizations with those units is key, and they certainly have the tools to do that. But those are just my thoughts on the Tatars. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.